What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the PFF NFL show. We are post-Super Bowl, so it is full steam ahead on draft season. For this episode, we got a fun one. We're doing more mock draft madness, but we're taking a look at my mock draft, the one that I recently wrote for PFF.com. And to talk about it, it's a tag team 2-on-1 duo here with the college guys, Dalton, Wasserman, and Max Chadwick, ganging up on me and trying to beat me up for my good takes of a mock that is 100% correct and logical in every way. So that's what we're going to do over the next hour or so. Get to talk about this brand new mock draft. You guys can follow along over at PFF.com and go check out that mock draft yourself. Fellas, how we doing? Are you? I'm hoping that you've taken a look at the mock. You're ready to break it down at every single angle, because I'm ready to come out fighting. I can defend every single pick with as much logic as possible. So how you guys feeling today?
I'm ready to rip into shreds. I don't know about you, Dalton.
Absolutely. This is really an interrogation of you that we're doing here. And the only way we couldn't do it one-on-one. We know you're the best in the business, but to get two of us at least trying to interrogate our way through this is going to be a fun time. Also, Trevor, turn this around real quick. How was New Orleans? You only spent a whole week in New Orleans.
New Orleans, truly, honestly, one of my favorite cities in the world. Myself, and I don't know if you guys saw, Cardi B, we both think that it is a top food city in the United States. So Cardi B officially knows ball. It was good to get that confirmation with her also. Dude, I had gumbo like 4 or 5 times in the span of when I was there, truly. I mean, seafood gumbo is just like one of my favorite dishes there is. Doesn't get any better in New Orleans. But honestly, the Superdome's a great stadium to have a major event like the Super Bowl in. And my takeaway after being there for a week was genuinely New Orleans should host the Super Bowl once every 3 years. The city is so walkable. The convention center is fantastic. So many different restaurants. They got the downtown scene. They got a sports book and casino. The stadium is fantastic. It's all right there. It's all in the water. The weather was nice. New Orleans should host the Super Bowl once out of every 3 years. I said what I said. So that's how I feel about it. Are you guys big Noel people? Do you like KGC food, New Orleans food? Oh,
he's going for Mardi Gras very soon, though.
Trevor. Oh, yeah. I go at least once or twice a year. So I'll be going right after the Combine, because the Combine's right after Mardi Gras. So it's going to be a long, long week and a half. But you're right. It's the best food town on the planet. I'm with you on that. And it's just such a great vibe being down there any time of year, really. But especially for a huge event like that, absolutely, it's a great place to be.
Makes sense as a man who has experienced Gasparilla many times in Florida that you would also be a Mardi Gras guy and go to New Orleans. All right, let's get into this mock draft. Let's get ready to rip this bad boy to shreds. So, again, for everybody out there, if you haven't seen the mock draft yet, go over to PFF.com. You can follow along in this show. You can get in on the chat. Not only are these guys going to talk about some picks either that they liked or didn't like, there's some interesting things I threw in there because I threw in a lot of trades as well in this mock draft. Maybe went a little bit overboard, but hey, it's a conversation piece. So there you guys can see it on the full screen. You can check that out, and you can follow along here on the show, and you can get in on the show by looking at the mock draft and then getting in the chat as well. We'll go in increments of 5. I feel like that's the best way to do that. So I'll read off 1 through 5, and then you guys can sort of pick 1 or 2 selections that you like from that group, and we can talk about it a little bit more. Number 1 overall, I had the Tennessee Titans not selecting a quarterback. I wanted to see a mock that was a little bit different this time around. So I had them going with edge rusher Abdul Carter at number 1. At number 2, the Cleveland Browns, I had them going with the wide receiver cornerback phenom that is Travis Hunter from Colorado. Number 3, the New York Giants. This is where I had the first quarterback coming off the board, because even though I wanted to do something a little bit different, I've said over the last couple of weeks, I feel as though the Giants and Shedeur Sanders, they got a little bit of a thing going on, and I think that when it's all said and done, wherever he's going to get picked, I feel as though Shedeur Sanders is going to be a New York Giant. So I have him as the first QB off the board at number 3. The Patriots at number 4, I have them taking offensive tackle Will Campbell from LSU. And then at number 5, we have our first trade here. I have the San Francisco 49ers popping up to number 5, trading with the Jacksonville Jaguars. Deebo Samuel going to Jacksonville, and a little bit of a pick swap here, going from 5 to 11. And the Niners selecting a guy that they really need on the defensive line in Mason Graham. All right, fellas, what do we think? Where are we starting with this one?
So I'll start. Honestly, I think the most fascinating pick in this entire draft is that second pick with the Cleveland Browns, because I do think with the way that their franchise is situated right now with no franchise quarterback, and they need a lot of talent at different spots, right? Receiver, corner, offensive line's getting older. They need help there. I'm just curious that now that you threw trades into this, how much consideration was put into the Browns trading down to maybe, say, 6 or 7 to the Raiders or the Jets for one of those teams maybe to trade up to get their franchise quarterback? And what are the odds that you think that might happen as opposed to taking, yes, an elite talent in a Travis Hunter, maybe an Abdul Carter, maybe even they reach a little bit for an offensive lineman if they feel like that's the best move? What were the thoughts on maybe trading down for the Browns? Because that feels like a very real scenario come April.
It's a great question, a great conversation. Obviously, I hear sort of a little bit of what you think, Dalton, and would love to hear what you guys think on it. So ultimately, I didn't have that happen. And I honestly thought about the Tennessee Titans trading back as well, because if you're not taking a quarterback at 1 or 2, I think you could throw the Titans in there too and say, this is a team that would look to trade back in this draft. But at the same time, it's hard for me to realistically think that a trade like this is going to happen because the Titans and the Browns need a quarterback. And so if those two teams don't think that either Cam Ward or Shedeur Sanders, both of which were on the board at this point, are worth picking themselves, then why would a team picking much further down, say the Raiders at number 6, maybe the Jets at number 7, now that they're moving on from Aaron Rodgers, like why would those teams give up not just one pick to pick a quarterback, multiple picks? Now, it wouldn't cost like, the 3 first-round picks that we've seen in years past, but finding that trade partner was honestly the most difficult part of that, because originally when I was writing this mock, I wanted to see what it would be like if the Titans trade down. But then every scenario I tried to throw out there, I was like, man, again, if the Titans wouldn't spend one pick at a quarterback at number 1, why would another team pay multiple draft picks to go up and get one of these quarterbacks? Maybe it ends up happening because maybe a team likes these quarterbacks more than the Titans and the Browns. But to answer your question, that's why I ultimately didn't have a trade down. Not because I didn't think about it. I think it makes a lot of sense for Cleveland. But it's hard to find a dance partner here for a trade when you already are sort of up in the air on what you think about these quarterbacks. So Dalton, really, I mean, like, what do you think about sort of that logic and how that got there? Because I know that you have thoughts on these teams trading down too.
Well, I think it makes sense, and I think it speaks to the strategy of having to read what other teams are thinking as well as what's in your own war room, right? If you believe that the Titans and Browns don't think very highly of this class of quarterbacks, as maybe a lot of teams do, then maybe you take a chance and see if they fall to you, and we might get a scenario here with them not going in the first 2 picks, and obviously Shedeur going 3rd to the Giants because they need one so badly, and the coaching staff is under such pressure. But I think it is a part of it when you consider, and I think a lot of times that's why these trades happen on draft night, right, as opposed to weeks before when teams are still evaluating all the players. I think it's a great point to bring up. And then there's the element where, well, you know what, Travis Hunter or Abdul Carter is just a more elite talent than anybody in this quarterback class. If it was last year's class, it probably wouldn't be the case because we had 3 guys who were thought of as elite talents at quarterback. But I agree with you. I think when you think about, it's all about opinions, right? And if the Browns war room feels like, okay, these guys just aren't our guy, and we don't want to do that long term, we'll wait another year. Maybe next year it's Arch Manning, it's Garrett Nussmeier, it's whoever it is that's still in college. Then you have a situation where they still have to build talent. Now, I'm a fan of the Browns not taking a quarterback. I don't think their roster is set up for a rookie quarterback, especially to succeed. I'm just curious if trading down for more assets in the future would be the right move for them.
Yeah, I think they'd consider it, but ultimately that's why I didn't have that happen. Max, what do you got in this group of 5?
I got to talk about the actual trade that you made, Trevor, here at number 5 overall. I love it. San Francisco moving all the way up to number 5. And one reason why I love it, Trev, is because the Jaguars get Deebo Samuel. And if you look at Liam Cohen and what he wants out of his receivers in his offense, the Buccaneers last year were 2nd in the NFL in yards after the catch. The Jaguars were 23rd. So you add one of the best receivers in the NFL in terms of getting yards after the catch in Deebo Samuel. I love that for Trevor Lawrence. I love that for Liam Cohen in the offense. I do wonder if Jacksonville is looking to trade out of that pick if a team like the Jets, for example, will want to trade up to number 5 to leapfrog the Raiders at number 6, who we'll get to in a second, where you have taken Cam Ward. I wonder if the Jets, who are obviously now moving on from Aaron Rodgers, would move up to get Cam Ward. But otherwise, though, San Francisco needs top-end talent at D-tackle, and if you get Mason Graham there with Nick Bosa, that would be an incredible defensive line, I think. So I love the trade for the Jaguars' perspective. I just wonder if the Jets would be the one to trade up to number 5 instead of the 49ers.
Yeah, it could be. It's just sort of what you would probably want from that haul, right? If you're talking about the Jets, yeah, you get something a little bit different. You probably get a little bit more draft pick incentive stuff, and maybe that's kind of the case of what they would want in a trade back. But there is also only one Deebo Samuel type of player, right? And so I think that's really what made the 49ers, in my opinion, the right match for them to move up. Because I was also trying to match sort of like trade value, right? Because I'm thinking about, all right, well, what would Deebo Samuel go for? I don't know, like a 2nd, maybe. Feels like a 3rd because he's getting a little bit older. He's signed his contract, so that jump from 11 to 5, it's a little bit of San Francisco is overpaying a little bit, but they're getting one of the few blue chip players, in my opinion, in this class. So I think in that case, it would be worth it for them. So that's sort of my thought process there with that trade. And then going back to Cleveland, I forgot to make this point. the reason why I have them overlooking a quarterback and not just being like, well, we really need one, we're going to take one here. We're going to get to the Myles Garrett trade in a second. If you are trading away Myles Garrett, you're full rebuild. Like you're full rebuild. Now you don't have to like tear this roster to the studs because I think there are a lot of good players on the roster. But you're at that point like multi-year rebuild. Don't think to yourself, oh, we have to take a quarterback here at number 2 just because we don't have one. Like you got to have a much longer term view. But we'll get to that Myles Garrett trade there in a second. Blake in the chat says, wouldn't the Falcons be a candidate to trade up to number 1 for Abdul Carter, a team that really needs an edge rusher? That Abdul Carter with the Atlanta Falcons would be a dream come true for that team. There's no doubt about it. But you're paying a pretty penny to go from 15 to 1 to make that happen. So is it less than 0 chance? Or is it a more than 0 chance that would happen? Yes, but I still think it's single digits in terms of the probability that something like that would happen.
I was going to say, Trevor, I mean, moving up from 15 to 1, like you said, it would take a haul, and that usually would be for a quarterback. I don't know if you would trade that kind of haul for an edge rusher. As good as Abdul Carter is, and I'm a Penn State fan, so I hate saying this, but as good as he is, I just don't think an edge defender is worth that kind of haul would be needed to take to trade up from 15 to 1.
Yeah, and Pete in the chat is saying, if Carter and Hunter aren't there for New England, as is the case in this scenario, what about New England trading the Browns of their number 4 overall pick for Myles Garrett? Well, I think that you could certainly think about that. I think that it's not impossible to think that trade would happen. The problem is that even for as great and as high up in this draft order as number 4 is, Cleveland would probably want more. Cleveland's probably looking to get a first rounder next year, no matter what, so they can have even more flexibility to probably draft the quarterback that they want in next year's class. So that would all of a sudden be a pretty steep price for a New England team that is a long way away from competing. And Myles Garrett's still in his prime, so it's not like I think you only got a couple of years and then he won't be good anymore. But to me, where the Patriots are in their winning window, I don't love that. I don't love them giving up a first-round pick this year and probably a first-round pick next year to go get Myles Garrett when they would need those for team building. Dalton, any thoughts on that kind of before I go on to the next 5 with New England in that situation?
I think the other element there is that Myles Garrett has openly said he wants to go to a contender and win a Super Bowl, and New England, at least for the next probably year or 2, is not in that position. So I think it's more likely we talk about teams like Detroit or Washington or several other teams that were in or near the playoffs for that, as opposed to New England.
Yeah, just a couple more things in the chat before we talk about the next 5. T-Mac says, why do you feel the Giants will go Shedeur over Ward? I'm not super convicted on that. It's just I was boots on the ground at the Shrine Bowl. The Giants were very in on Shedeur Sanders when they were there, interacting with them all the time, really long interviews, had the owners, had the general manager there. I mean, like everybody was meeting with Shedeur Sanders, and I thought Shedeur really handled himself well. I mean, it was great to see him on the sidelines at practice, talking with the guys, talking with the coaching staff on practice, even though he wasn't practicing there or participating in the game. I thought he handled himself well in the media, and if you love that confident part of his personality, like I feel like that's somebody that you gravitate towards. And so that's just ultimately why I ended up going with Shedeur over Cam. But Cam could certainly be the number 3 pick to the Giants if he is there.
Didn't you say that you saw Brian Dable and Shedeur Sanders have like an incredible dap up during the
Well, there's a clip of that. I think you could probably search it on Twitter. I didn't take the video, but yeah, Dable is walking off the field and Shedeur's right there, and they have like, it's just an insanely clean like hop up boom, and it's just like it is as to a T teach tape of a great dab walking by drive by dap up that you're gonna find. So
that's draft analysis right there. I love that.
It goes into it. They've already got chemistry there. All right, the next 5 here in this mock draft. This is where I have Cam Ward coming off the board to the Las Vegas Raiders at number 6. So they do get their quarterback. They're able to sit back, stay outside the top 5, and still get their quarterback here in Cam Ward. Number 7, Tyler Warren, the tight end from Penn State to the New York Jets. Number 8, Carolina Panthers taking the edge rusher from Marshall, Mike Green. 9, New Orleans Saints went a little bit of a different direction. I think I've only had them going defensive line because they really need it. But here I actually had them going offensive line. And I explained a little bit there in the blurb. Hey, they got defensive line needs, but if you drafted Armand Membu, you can play Membu at right tackle. You've got Fuanga at left tackle. You can kick Trevor Penning to the inside. Hopefully Eric McCory is healthy for a full season. And if Cesar Ruiz is your weakest link on the offensive line, I think you're doing all right. So that sets up a good offensive trenches there for the Saints. And then number 10, our second trade here. The Cleveland Browns on the clock again, taking offensive tackle Kelvin Banks Jr. because I have the Bears trading this year's first-round pick at number 10 and next year's first-round pick in 2026 to get themselves Myles Garrett. So there's the Myles Garrett trade here in this mock draft. Dalton, where are we starting with this one?
I think we have to start with Myles Garrett and what you have in that trade there, because I think the Myles Garrett story is the biggest story of the entire offseason, even more than free agency in the draft. You have arguably the best defensive player in football who's trying to make himself available for a trade. And going to the Chicago Bears, I mean, he's a player who would change any team's defense, but especially this one that needs a second legitimate pass rusher aside from Montez Sweat, right? They have issues in the trenches on both sides of the ball, and we know they're trying to make a big impact, right, with Caleb Williams, with Ben Johnson running the offense now, and really trying to just break the kind of bad mojo that's been going in Chicago lately, right? I mean, who better to do it than Myles Garrett? So I find that fascinating. Absolutely would change the look of their defense. I think it would give Dennis Allen a lot to work with all of a sudden when it comes to, okay, now we have Myles Garrett. All I have to do is improve the coverage a little bit because it kind of broke down the stretch in the secondary, and then it's just up to Ben Johnson and the offense to do their part. So I find that very, very interesting that they would be the ones, even after a 5-win season, to go all in on someone like Garrett who's looking for a championship. But the Bears do have a talented football team, and they just need the offense. They need Caleb Williams. They need the offensive line to get things going. I would say interior offensive line help would then be the need beyond that pick and getting into the mid-rounds of this draft. But that's obviously the most fascinating part of this, because I think Garrett is the most fascinating story of the entire offseason.
Yeah, and you know, just to address this into the chat as well, because, you know, Mike said, as a Bears fans, this seems very, very unlikely. I doubt that Ben Johnson wants to trade away 2 first-round picks in his first draft when they have so many holes on the O-line. You're right, but you have free agency, potentially navigate that a little bit, at least maybe get one new interior offensive line piece, and here's why I think it makes sense for the Chicago Bears. They have 2 second-round picks in this draft. So you're trading away. Yes, you're trading away 2 firsts. You're trading away number 10 here, and you're trading away a first next year. But you still have 2 second-round picks here in this draft. And it's a draft where there's going to be value in potential starters and impact players that you can get in the second round. So for Ben Johnson, I think that this makes a lot of sense, because you're going to get one of the premier defensive players in the NFL. You're probably going to draft at least one offensive lineman with those 2 picks that you have at the top of the second round here coming up on day 2. And you'll probably get one extra guy in free agency before you even get to draft weekend. So then all of a sudden, you got an improved offensive line. You're the one who's coming in and getting to work with Caleb Williams. You got great receivers to throw the ball to. You got a good secondary. You got good linebackers. And now you have Myles Garrett on a defensive line with Montez Sweat. That's awesome. Dennis Allen's your defense coordinator, to throw that in there as well. Like, for as much as people go, well, Myles wants to go to a contender, why would he go to the Bears? In this situation, Myles Garrett going to the Bears, they become a major contender. And so that's why I like that trade there. Max, what about you? What do you want to point out?
I was also going to say, too, the Bears have the 7th most effective cap space this year, over $54 million to play with this offseason. And also, we know Ben Johnson seems to be a supremely confident offensive play caller. He probably feels like, hey, I'm going to have this offense right no matter who's playing out there for me. Let's get a guy on the defense or Dennis Allen to play with, and Myles Garrett, one of maybe the best defensive player in the NFL. So I do love that for the Chicago Bears perspective. I want to talk about Cam Ward, Trev. I think this is a dream scenario here for the Raiders at number 6 overall. And I think you put it beautifully in your mock draft, saying the Raiders were left at the quarterback altar with no bride last year. And that's really what happened to them last year, right? The top 6 guys were just not available to them in last year's draft. And it's rare to have that many guys go in the top 15, but that's how good last year's quarterback class was. And the Raiders probably feel gypped that they didn't get any single one of them, even though they had one of the biggest needs at quarterback. So I think Cam Ward falling to them at number 6 overall, who you think is the best quarterback in the draft, many people think is the best quarterback in the draft. Him falling to 6 and them getting him without having to trade up to get him, I think is a dream scenario for Las Vegas and Pete Carroll in his first year in the Raiders. So I love that pick there for Las Vegas.
Yeah, I'm with you. I mean, this is the dream scenario here for the Las Vegas Raiders. And going back to what Dalton was talking about at the beginning of the show, hey, you think about maybe a trade down for the Cleveland Browns or even the Tennessee Titans at number 1, the team that I immediately go to and probably the preferred destination of either the Titans or the Browns if they're trading down. is the Raiders at 6, because that's the closest spot that you can imagine trading down to for a team that still wants to go up to get a quarterback. But again, the more I sat there and I was like, okay, well, you're probably going to have to give up number 6 and then a couple of second-round picks. I just kind of stopped myself and I went, if the Titans, who need a quarterback just as bad as the Raiders do, wouldn't take Cam Ward at 1, why would the Raiders pick Cam Ward with 3 different draft picks? And I can't come up with a good reason right now. So when it comes to those teams at the very top trading down, I don't know if I can confidently make those trades until we get past free agency and we know for a fact that these teams are going to be desperate one way or another. So the Raiders landing a quarterback at number 6 is definitely the dream scenario there. I'll throw it back to you guys. I just want to know really quick. Tyler Warren to the Jets, Dalton. You know I had to ask you about it. What do you think?
I think with neither quarterback on the board and with Mason Graham off the board, because I think he would absolutely be the pick at 7 if he were there, I think Warren makes a lot of sense. Either him or Tedero McMillan, right? I think when you look at the Jets needing one more offensive weapon, they're now cutting ties with Aaron Rodgers. There's a lot of theory that they're going to cut ties with Devontae Adams as well. And in the passing game, that pretty much leaves you with just Garrett Wilson as your only legitimate weapon. And the more I think about Warren, the more I watch him, I think he's one of the 8 or 9 best players in this draft. So to take him this high, I know it's high generally for a tight end. It's darn well higher than Brock Bowers went last year, but we talk about all the time that Brock Bowers should not have fallen to 13, 14 last year.
He would go higher. He would go higher in a redraft too. That's another thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so if you're the Jets and you're thinking, hey, we can get another guy that's the really freaking good tight end, it's worth it.
He's already one of the 3 or 4 best tight ends in the league. And I think I've said this before about Warren, I think every year we get one guy that all of a sudden everybody's talking about, oh, he's George Kittle. This guy's George. No. This one is actually, you can say it, and it can be kind of proper with the way that he moves, the way he can work after the catch, the way that he can block. This is as complete a tight end as we've seen in a long time, I think. Even Brock Bowers, a little bit smaller, a little bit more of a versatile weapon in the receiving in the game, as a receiver, but more of a functional blocker. Warren can be an outstanding blocker like Kittle. He can really be a great two-way tight end. And I think to take a weapon here like either him or Tedero McMillan out at wide receiver makes a lot of sense for the Jets.
Yeah, James saying in the chat, I understand the thought process here. Hey, Jets have a defensive coach. They're going to take CB. A guy like Will Johnson was still on the board at this point, so they could have taken a player like Will Johnson who addresses an immediate need and is a defensive player there for you. I understand that thought process, but I keep going back to this, and I wrote this in the blurb. With the Jets moving on from Aaron Rodgers, I remember watching one of the post-hiring press conferences from Aaron Glenn where they sort of asked him about Rodgers, and his answer was, well, us bringing back Rodgers is less about Rodgers, and it's more of where we think our roster is. If we think we're ready to compete, we'll bring back Aaron, and because he's probably going to be the best thing that we can get. He's going to be the best option there. And then with them announcing that they are moving on from Aaron Rodgers, to me that says that they took a look at this roster. Aaron Glenn took a look at this roster, and he said, no, we're not ready yet. The whole thing is not ready yet. We need a couple of years before we're really opening our winning window wide open. Jets fans might not want to hear that, but it feels as though their actions are reflecting that. With that being the case, then you go look at his resume and sort of his career of when he was with the Detroit Lions. And even though he wasn't Brad Holmes, he wasn't the general manager, he wasn't Dan Quinn, he wasn't the head coach, he saw what Detroit did within their scouting and team building process. And remember, they drafted Jahmyr Gibbs at 12. They drafted Jack Campbell with a premium pick. They drafted Sam Laporta with a premium pick. And a lot of us looked at this and we were like, what are you doing? Like, why are you drafting all these non-premium position players? And at the time, we questioned a lot of it. And then a couple of years down the road, we go, oh, this is actually a top 3 roster in the league on paper. And I think Aaron Glenn is now going to have that approach with the New York Jets to say, I'm not going to pigeonhole myself to just drafting this position because we have a need or just drafting this position because it's not a quote-unquote premium spot. He's going to pick the football player that he believes is the best. And Tyler Warren's a damn good football player. So wanted to make sure that we hit that extra one there. Next 5 here, outside of the top 10. So this is the second part of the Jacksonville and San Francisco trade. We had the Jags trading back from number 5 back to number 11 with the San Francisco 49ers. The Niners moved up and got Mason Graham. The Jags got Deebo Samuel from the 49ers. And now here at number 11, they're picking Will Johnson to create a trio of Will Johnson, Tyson Campbell, and Jerry and Jones. Number 12, the Dallas Cowboys. I understand it. It's the first thing that I say in the blurb. It's a tired pick, but it's hard for me to not make this pick. It's Ashton Jeanty, the running back from Boise State. 13, safety Malachi Starks from Georgia going to the Miami Dolphins. 14, we got another trade here. I got the Los Angeles Chargers popping up 8 picks here, going from 22 to number 14 to get Tetsuroa McMillan. We talked about how it felt like it was just Ladd McConkey and nobody else last year. Oh, the Chargers, they're going to sit back, they're going to get Colson Loveland. Yeah, but what if they have the chance to get Tetsuroa McMillan? If he is within range, I love the idea of this one for them to trade up and get Tet. And then at number 15, to round it out, Luther Burden, the wide receiver from Missouri, going to the Atlanta Falcons. Fellas, where are we starting with? Max, I'll start with you.
There's a lot of love here, Trev. I love the Jaguars taking Will Johnson at 11 because that's actually is one of the guys I'd be targeting for them at number 5 overall. So the fact that they could trade back and get him at number 11 is fantastic. I love the trade up for the Chargers, getting Tetsuroa McMillan, obviously getting a pure X receiver that Quentin Johnson just hasn't really been for them so far. The one I will say I don't love is number 15 overall with the Falcons taking Luther Burden. Now, I love the scorched earth approach they're taking to that offense with Michael Penix Jr. and Bijan Robinson and Drake London and adding Luther Burden to that mix as well. However, I am so high on James Pierce Jr., who we'll get to very quickly here. But I think with their need at pass rush being so severe for the last half decade or so, I'd be really, really hard-pressed to pass up on him here if he's available at number 15 overall.
I totally hear what you're saying. There's many times that I have done James Pierce Jr. to the Atlanta Falcons, and maybe this switch up was a little bit of fatigue for that. Because I do think that mock drafts, for as much as they are about predicting, and I want to make sure that, I know that more people care about mock drafts sort of like the closer that we get to draft weekend. And so there will be more people who read this mock, and there will be more people who read the next one, and there will be more people who read the next one. So maybe people reading this will be like, whoa, what are we talking about edge rusher? But I sort of also use mock draft to explore different possibilities.
Sure.
And where I do certainly think that the Falcons need edge rusher, it is also a pretty deep edge rush class. You're going to be able to get some sort of an edge rusher. Maybe you might have 2 swings at the bat on day 2 if you're the Atlanta Falcons to be able to do something like that. The wide receiver class, where it's good, I still like this wide receiver class, it's not as deep as it has been in years past. And so having the ability to go get a Luther Burden and then saying, okay, now the priority, we're really going to attack edge rusher and defensive line pass rushers on day 2, I still like that better because you're keeping the best player available approach. And it's not like the Falcons don't need another offensive weapon. They kind of do. And so if you have an offense where you got Drake London, Luther Burden III, you got Darnell Mooney, you have whatever Kyle Pitts is going to give you. I don't know how much longer he's going to be in Atlanta, but you got Bijan Robinson out of the backfield. That is one hell of an offense for Michael Penix to be able to make magic happen with. And so I kind of went with the best player available approach here with Luther Burden. So Dalton, what about you? What you got?
I love the 2 trades. If the Jaguars walked out of night 1 with Will Johnson and Deebo Samuel, Liam Cohen's going to jump out of his shoes, right? Because you filled arguably 2 of the biggest needs on the entire team. We can work on the offensive line later in the draft, but you mentioned it before, to get Deebo Samuel as a yak threat that they were missing and that Liam Cohen wants to emphasize in this offense, and then to get Will Johnson, arguably the best corner in the draft. Some say he's the best corner in the draft, maybe behind Travis Hunter. Some say as a pure corner, maybe in front of Travis Hunter. We've heard all the Pat Surtain comps. I think getting those 2 guys out of night 1 would be fantastic. I think for the Chargers, Tetsuroa McMillan, you could not have a better complement to Ladd McConkey than Tetsuroa McMillan. And with what they want to do throwing the football down the field, McMillan at 6'5", all the acrobatic things he can do down the field, one of the best vertical receivers, if not the best vertical receiver in this draft. And then you mentioned coming up with different scenarios like you did with Atlanta, but I'm looking at 12 with the Cowboys too, and I think everybody's kind of making the obvious pick of, they need to run the ball and they need a running back, and Brian Schottenheimer is going to want Ashton Jeanty, and that's how they're going to fix it, right? But is there any other consideration? Is there a chance that, like you mentioned, the depth of the defensive line class, there's a lot of depth in this running back class too, plus they have Rico Dowdle, who came on pretty strong in the second half of the season. Is there a chance, what were the other options that you thought about maybe instead of Jeanty, unless it was just that obvious a pick and I'm coming up with scenarios for nothing? What else was under consideration for the Cowboys at 12?
No, I think that there's 2 other positions that I really look at with the Cowboys. If they're not going to go with Ashton Jeanty, if he's going to be on the board, the only other 2 that I would probably consider here is do you want another difference-making wide receiver? Because we have both of them on the board here, right? You have Tetairoa McMillan, you have Luther Burden III. Picking one of those guys at number 12 could make a ton of sense for this team because it felt like it was just CeeDee Lamb, and that's kind of it for them last year. And so they would need another like wide receiver 2, wide receiver 1 type of a player. I think they have some guys on there that could be like a wide receiver 3 for you, but truly being that other complementary wide receiver to make sure that that offense is humming in the passing game when you get Dak back fully healthy. I thought about wide receiver because both those guys are still on the board. And then the other one is flipping to the defensive side. Dallas's biggest weakness throughout the entirety of the 2024 season was stopping the run, and it was really the interior defensive line. So at that point, you go, okay, Mason Graham is off the board. A Walter Nolan from Ole Miss, a Kenneth Grant from Michigan. Do either of those guys, do you feel good enough about them as run stuffers and then what they're also going to give you in the passing game to potentially pick them in the top 12 right there at number 12 for Dallas? So those were the two other picks and positions that I really thought about there for them. But I think that Genty, everything that he brings, that as well just changes the offense so much for this team, and I think he'd be somebody who'd be such a major contributor for them throughout his entire rookie contract. So that's ultimately why I went with Genty there at number 12. All right, before we get to the second half of this mock draft, got to tell you that this podcast is brought to you by Cherry Bundy, the performance drink that is fueling the Healthly revolution. This thing is absolutely fantastic. If you live an active lifestyle at all whatsoever, you got to check out their products. Natural products, natural ingredients, so it's got no added sugar to it. The tart cherries that it's made with, highest antioxidant fruit or vegetable in the world, which means it's got all sorts of benefits. Helps reduce soreness, increases recovery, naturally occurring melatonin in there to help you improve sleep, helps support immunity as well. I know allergies, sickness is a big thing. People are always trying to be as healthy as possible, especially this time of year with the weather change and everything like that. This can even help you with that. It's used by over 500 collegiate and professional sports teams, every single team in the NFL. Check it out. The products are available over at Amazon, cherrybundy.com, retailers nationwide, so check out your local Publix or Kroger or wherever you do your shopping. They might have it there. But if you don't have it there, and we've got a special offer, you go to cherrybundy.com, use the promo code PFF20, you get 20% off whatever your order is. So go check it out. They've got all sorts of different products, not just for recovery, but they've also got, energy before a workout, things to help you sleep. They've got drinks, they've got gel packs, so many different great things. Go check it all out at cherrybundy.com. All right, here we go. Second half of the mock draft. Arizona Cardinals at number 16. Max, this is where your boy James Pierce Jr. comes off the board, the edge rusher from Tennessee. So the Cardinals get an edge rusher here that they could be happy with and bet on that athleticism with. 17, the Cincinnati Bengals. This is where I have defensive tackle Walter Nolan from Ole Miss going off the board. 18, Seattle Seahawks going with Shamar Stewart, the edge rusher. And more than just an edge rusher, feels like just a versatile defensive lineman from Texas A&M. 19, we got another trade here. I got the Washington Commanders. If they lose out on Myles Garrett, I have to think that they're still going to stay aggressive, right? This was a team that was in the conversation for Brandon Ayuk. They're one of the top names whenever anybody talks about a Myles Garrett destination. Myles Garrett even talked about the Washington Commanders potentially himself when he was doing the media tour during Super Bowl media week. So if they don't get Myles Garrett, I have them staying aggressive, going to get one of those difference-making edge rushers in Mykel Williams here, trading up with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers at number 19. And then at number 20, a very common mock draft pick, but one that I do think makes a lot of sense. And it's the Denver Broncos going tight end Colson Loveland from Michigan. Dalton, where are we starting with this 5?
I mean, I just look, we just mentioned how deep the defensive line class is, and I just look at 4 in a row going here in the teens is just crazy. And they're all deserving players, right? Pierce, been one of the best edge rushers in college football for 2 years. Walter Nolan, what a breakout he had at Ole Miss, right? And I think a perfect fit for what Al Golden's going to try to do with this Cincinnati defense. Shamar Stewart, who was arguably the best player at the Senior Bowl, at least through the first 2 practices, the way that he played. And then you got the Commanders making the big trade up for Mykel Williams. So I think for me, it's just more about maybe a quick summary of what you think makes each player a fit for each of those situations. With, again, there's so much D-line depth, but there's also a boatload of top-end talent. It's starting to come off in the late teens here.
Yeah, I love the Cardinals getting James Pierce Jr. because, I'm a BJ Ojulari fan, but he's been hurt over the last couple of years. James Pierce Jr. gives you that same, stand-up, outside linebacker speed type of element there that they were hoping to get with Ojulari, and hopefully Ojulari is fully healthy, so maybe you could have a really good 1-2 combo with that, but they need speed, I think, on that defensive line and in the pass rush area. So if they're running that odd front, that 3-4 odd front, James Pierce can be that outside linebacker for you. Walter Nolan makes a ton of sense for the Cincinnati Bengals because, well, one, any defensive line pick would make sense for them because it felt like their defensive strategy last year was Trey Hendrickson, please save us, and then not really having anything after that if he wasn't able to. So you're increasing the talent along the defensive line, which is important anyways, but stopping the run was a big deal for this Cincinnati Bengals team, and it gets a lot better with a guy who had an elite run defense grade in Walter Nolan, and he was improving as a pass rusher as well, one of the strongest dudes on the defensive line that we have in this class this year, and that's really saying something. So I think Cincinnati would love him. Shamar Stewart with the Seattle Seahawks, I mentioned how versatile he is. That's why I love him in this Mike Macdonald defense. You know, can you imagine a defensive line that's got Leonard Williams, Byron Murphy II, and Shamar Stewart? I mean, the possibilities are endless how you align those three guys with one of them playing nose tackle and then one of them playing 5-technique defensive end from one player to the other because they've got the talent, they've got the size, and they've got the athleticism to do it. So I just love the versatility that brings the Mike Macdonald front in Seattle to get him. And then really Mykel Williams going to the Commanders, it's really just them trying to capitalize on really that first one or two tiers of edge rushers in this class, not waiting all the way to 29 and thinking, okay, well, now all of these guys are gone. Now we don't have an impact pass rusher that we want. Mykel, Dalton, we've talked about this before. He's not the best pass rusher. He's not the most natural pass rusher. I don't know if he's ever going to be, but he's still a damn good football player. He can still really hold the line of scrimmage. He can still defend the run really well. He is strong as an ox. And it's not always about, well, we've got to draft this one position because, hey, we need a pass rusher more than anything else. That means we wouldn't be interested in a player like Mykel Williams. I don't think that's the case. I think you could draft a guy like Mykel Williams, play him on the edge, and then hope that, you know, a year or two from now, you're considering him your edge 2. If Mykel Williams is your edge 1 in the NFL, yeah, you might be a little bit disappointed with how much that he's going to be able to give you or not give you in pass rushing. But if he's your edge 2 and he's setting a hard line or he's setting a hard edge at the line of scrimmage as a great run defender, and maybe he'll give you a little bit of extra juice as a pass rusher every now and then, that's a situation that you love. So I think Dan Quinn's going to have a little bit more of a long-term view with that. So that's how I would see those situations and how I got to that point. Max, what about you?
I actually love the 1 at 18, Trevor, Shamar Stewart going to the Seahawks, because we were at the Senior Bowl, obviously, and when we were waiting for our producer Tyler to get one of the 8 rental cars that he got for us, in front of us in the line was John Schneider, the GM of the Seahawks. So he was there all week, and we saw Mike Macdonald there on the sidelines all week as well. And like Dalton said, Shamar Stewart was the best player, I thought, at the Senior Bowl this past year. So I think it makes a lot of sense adding him within the edge rotation with Boye Mafe. Makes a lot of sense there. And obviously the other one we have to talk about is Colston Loveland going to the Broncos. I love this fit as well because the Broncos just need to add some sort of weapon, whether it be a wide receiver, whether it be a tight end, anyone, and grabbing easily one of the 2 best tight ends in this draft in Colston Loveland. I think there's a pretty clear drop-off between Tyler Warren, Colston Loveland, and everyone else in this tight end class. I think it makes a lot of sense, and we've seen before how much Sean Payton loves to utilize tight ends in his offenses. I mean, you look back at how dominant Jimmy Graham was, right, in those Saints offenses back in the day. So getting a guy who can win underneath in a great route runner at tight end in Colston Loveland, I think it's a perfect fit for Bo Nix in that offense.
Yeah, I like that as well. Obviously, they wanted, I think, Greg Dulcich to be that guy, and he wasn't. He's not even on the team anymore. So they need a big-time receiving tight end. And it's not just because they had a future Hall of Famer in Jimmy Graham all those years when Sean Payton was in New Orleans. That's not the only reason why they emphasize the tight end position. I think that's what he really wants to do. He understands how much of a mismatch that can be when you have that type of player. So I do think that makes sense. Jason in the chat is saying, just going off of our Commanders conversation, trading up for edge 2 when Washington doesn't have an edge 1, how does that make sense? Obviously, I think you're only making this trade if you think Mykel Williams can be a better pass rusher. But I was simply saying, even if he doesn't become sort of more than what he is right now, it'd still be okay. It's not like, oh, where you're making a bet and it's a boom or bust bet and it could totally fail and totally bust for you. The floor of what Mykel Williams gives you as a football player is still really high because of how athletically gifted he is and how well he moves. I just don't know if he's ever going to have like that true pass rusher's mentality. So you trade up for him if you believe there's more in the tank for him to be a better pass rusher. But at the very least, you're getting an edge 2 type of a player with a very high floor for the NFL level. So that's just to clarify that, because I do think that's a good question by Jason of why you would do that and why you would spend that capital to make that happen. Next 5. Pittsburgh Steelers at 21. I got them taking Jahdae Barron, the cornerback from Texas. 22, we got the Indianapolis Colts here. Colts trading back, obviously, from number 14 with the Chargers at number 22. So they trade back. They get a couple of extra assets. The reason why and the explanation that I have here is that Chris Ballard, he's a scout. I mean, like, this dude is all about the draft. He's all about team building. That's kind of how he worked his way up to be a general manager. he sees draft classes really well. And I know that Colts fans are probably going to give me crap for that because he doesn't always make the right pick. But I think that he has a lot of really healthy picks, especially on day 2. And he knows that this class in particular, a lot of the team that we might look back on and say they had the best draft, it might be the team that had the most picks on day 2. So you trade back a couple of spots, you get a couple of extra picks on day 2 there for you. And you also get a guy like Siobhan Revelle, who is a very talented cornerback. He can play on the outside for you. He's coming back from that ACL tear. And if he didn't tear his ACL, he might have been a top 15 pick. So you're getting him a little bit of a bargain here in the 20s. I think this could make a lot of sense for Indianapolis, especially if like Tyler Warren and Malachi Starks, those guys were off the board right by that point. Tyler Warren had gone off the board at number 7. Malachi had gone off the board right before him at number 13. So it was a scenario where there wasn't a slam dunk pick that was right there for him. So I think they would entertain that trade back option. Green Bay at number 23, wide receiver Emeka Egbuka. 24, the Minnesota Vikings going guard Tyler Booker from Alabama. And then 25, the New England Patriots. I have them popping back up into the first round to select wide receiver Matthew Golden. So that gives them Will Campbell at number 4 and then Matthew Golden here at number 25. Fellas, where are we starting with this one?
So I think I want to expand even more on the Colts because what's fascinating anytime a team gets a new coordinator like a Lou Anarumo who runs his defense a whole lot different than Gus Bradley did before. I think before you were talking about I might not have taken Revelle in their defense, but it was such a rigid 4-man rush. They run the most cover 3 in football. It was kind of that Seattle cover 3 style where they call their defense and they try to run it as fundamentally sound as possible. And obviously they need talent at corner as well. So I think it's one of the more fascinating stories in Indianapolis is what type of players does Lou Anarumo want in this defense, and how much schematically is the defense going to change, right? They're not devoid of talent. They've got solid linebackers. They took Leatu Latu last year. They've got DeForest Buckner in the middle still, right? Kenny Moore in the slot. They do need more talent, but I'm also curious how Anarumo uses that talent, and we're not going to know until free agency and in the draft what types of players that he wants in this defense, right? Is it going to be similar to maybe Cincinnati where he wants really athletic players on the outside? Is he going to try to run a whole lot more cover 2 and get too high like a lot of these teams are doing now? So I think that's a big story in Indy. We know what their offense is going to look like. They have a lot of weapons, a good offensive line. They're trying to figure out the quarterback situation, whether, how much and what level of competition they want for Richardson. But I think that's a big story is the style of defense that Anarumo is going to play and how much that differs from Gus Bradley. And if Revelle fits that better, then he may be a player that they're targeting.
Yeah. Yep. I think that you explained it well. And again, like that's the other side of, actually making the pick with Siobhan Revelle, I think makes a ton of sense there schematically, like you mentioned there. But I even just love the move for them because it gets them some extra picks on day 2, which I know Chris Ballard is going to love. Man, we got people in the chat. I'm curious what you guys think of this. And I see this all the time. So, Darrell, I'm not calling you out here. I think a lot of Green Bay fans, when I have the Green Bay Packers drafting a wide receiver, they go, Green Bay's not drafting a wide receiver round 1. If they believe that Emeka Egbuka can actually be a wide receiver 1 for them, I really do think that they're going to do that. Now, maybe it's sort of like a Tetsuo McMillan or bust kind of a thing for them because I know they have athletic and measurable thresholds that they typically operate under, but this team was not good enough at receiver. And we were told that, we've got 4 wide receiver 1s on this team. We've got 2 tight end 1s on this team. No, you didn't. And I think that really came back to bite them. And they still need that top-tier wide receiver. So I think if you believe that Emeka Egbuka can be a wide receiver 1 like I do, then you probably make this happen. But anyways, Max, what do you want to call out here?
That was exactly where I was going to go because, Trevor, they have not taken a first-round wide receiver or tight end since 2002. Javon Walker was the last wide receiver or tight end they took in the first round 22 years ago now, which feels incredible considering how valuable weapons are in today's day and age of the NFL, and the Packers just refuse to do it in the first-round draft. So obviously they have found some gems later on in the draft like Devontae Adams, a second-round pick, Randall Cobb, Jordy Nelson, guys like that. But you're right. And I love the breakdown you put for Emeka Egbuka because you said it, right? The Packers have a lot of number 2 receivers and number 3 receivers on their team. There are probably people out there saying right now, well, why are you taking Emeka Egbuka? He was the number 2 receiver his entire career at Ohio State. Well, also, he was playing with Marvin Harrison Jr. and Jeremiah Smith, who are 2 of the best receivers we've had in college football in recent memory. So I think you made a great point right there. Like, yeah, he'd be the wide receiver 1 for pretty much any other team in college football. He just happened to play with two generational talents in Marvin Harrison Jr. and Jeremiah Smith. Harrison obviously won in the top 5 of the draft. We thought it could never get better than him. The very next year, they bring in Jeremiah Smith, and he's probably going to be the number 1 overall pick in 2027 when that happens. So I love that breakdown of Emeka Egbuka, because I know there's a lot of Packers fans saying, well, if you're saying we only have complimentary options, Emeka Egbuka's only been a complimentary option his entire career. That's because he played with two absolute freaking superstars at Ohio State, and I think this would be a home run pick for Green Bay.
Yeah, I just wanted to note this before we moved on to the next 7. We'll kind of round it out, and we'll round out the mock here. But guys, pick 24 and pick 25. It's the Minnesota Vikings at 24 and the Houston Texans at number 25. Look for those to be the most typical trade up spots or trade down spots for those two teams. The Vikings only have 4 picks right now in the entire draft. They have this first round pick at number 24. Then they don't pick again until their comp pick at 97. Then they don't pick again until the 5th round at 140. And then they pick again in the 5th round at 161. So a team that only has 4 draft picks currently, Minnesota is going to be looking to move down from 24. The only reason why I didn't have them moving down is because Tyler Booker is here, and I think they'd love Tyler Booker, and they'd probably sit there and take him. But the Texans at 25 is the same thing. They only have 6 picks right now, so I could assume that they are going to move down as well. New England's a team with plenty of draft picks right now. I believe New England has 11 picks. Let me make sure that I got that correctly. They have a ton of picks. No, they don't have that many. They have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So they've got 9 picks, and they do have that extra 3rd round pick of the Falcons there. So they've got the ammunition to move back up from the top part of the 2nd round into the 1st round to probably make this happen. But look for pick number 24 and 25 to be your typical trade down spots with those two teams. They're going to be looking for more draft capital. We'll round out this mock here. 26, the Los Angeles Rams, Jihad Campbell, the linebacker from Alabama. 27, the Baltimore Ravens taking offensive tackle Josh Connerly Jr. 28, Detroit Lions taking linebacker / edge rusher Jalen Walker from Georgia. 29, the Buccaneers traded down from 19 to 29 with the Washington Commanders. I've got the Buccaneers taking interior offensive lineman Gray Zabel from North Dakota State. 30, the Buffalo Bills taking defensive tackle Kenneth Grant from Michigan. 31, the Kansas City Chiefs taking defensive tackle Derek Harmon from Oregon. And then the Philadelphia Eagles at number 32 taking edge rusher Nick Scorton from Texas A&M. What are we talking about here, fellas?
I think I want to talk about your Tampa Bay Buccaneers there, and moving down and getting an extra 3rd round pick I think is a really good job. Of course, Jason Light seems to just nail the draft every year now, doesn't he? But I'm curious on Gray Zabel as the pick, because I find him kind of similar to Graham Barton, obviously, who they drafted last year, and that might have been part of your thinking in it. But Zabel, this means you're slotting him in at that left guard spot, right? So, and I know you've talked about him before, maybe being most comfortable at center. You're comfortable enough with him playing guard, and he's taken snaps, I think, at every position at some point at North Dakota State. You're comfortable enough with him there to feel like, okay, he can slot in next to Graham Barton and go through a similar process, maybe see some bumps his rookie year with the jump in competition. And I think even Barton this year had to get used to kind of NFL level play strength, right? I think another year or two in the weight room and getting stronger, he could be a lot better in the next couple of years. And of course, you've got a former North Dakota State teammate, right, and Cody Mauch on the other side. So that's kind of my thought, is you're comfortable enough with him playing guard there, most likely left guard, that you're good with slotting him in on the starting offensive line for the Bucs.
Yeah, I do. And down the stretch, I feel like Tampa Bay was really hitting their groove with Barton, coming along in the second half of the season in his rookie year. To me, they were one of the top 5 offensive lines in the NFL, I think, towards the last stretch of the season. And when you plug Gray Zabel in there, I think you're continuing to refortify that offensive line and allowing the strength to shine even brighter. And I think that they can once again be a top 5 offensive line, top 3 offensive line in the league going into next year. So I think that's obviously of paramount importance when you're talking about some offensive changes and offensive play call with Liam Cohen not being there, making sure the offensive trenches isn't something that you have to worry about too much. That was my thought process there. And then I have them trading back because of the same sort of thinking that I had with Chris Ballard and the Indianapolis Colts. And Chris Ballard sees that the strength in this class is going to be in rounds 2 and round 3, having a lot more darts to throw at the dartboard there. Jason Light, in my opinion, is going to be the same way. He's a scout at heart. That's how he came about in this business. That's how he got to the general manager spot. He would recognize that too. So if he has the opportunity to get one more pick on day 2, I think that he would do it, especially if he still gets to draft a guy like Gray Zabel.
Yeah, Trevor, I want to talk about 2 of your final 3 picks here that I love.
Okay.
Kenneth Grant going to the Buffalo Bills and Nick Scorton going to the Philadelphia Eagles. Kenneth Grant, I think, feels a massive need there in Buffalo, and I think a pairing with him and Ed Oliver on that defensive line. Oliver, obviously a little undersized at D-tackle, but still been incredibly productive over his career. Kenneth Grant is not undersized at all. He's 340 pounds, and he can move at that size. And we saw with Buffalo, man, I mean, they've got an MVP at quarterback who's going to raise the floor for everyone else in that offense, but they need to get better defensively. And I think Kenneth Grant, a guy that a lot of people think is a top 20, top 25 talent in this class, and he fills a need in Buffalo there at 30. I think that's a home run pick. And then Nick Skortons, I think, is a guy that I think a lot of people are forgetting about right now in this draft. Obviously, his own teammate, Shamar Stewart, seems to be overtaking him in the draft right now. He was still an incredibly productive player, especially in his sophomore year at Purdue. Wasn't the best year at Texas A&M this past year. They put him a lot more of this hand in the dirt, more than I would have loved to see at Texas A&M, but he's still an incredibly productive player. And Philadelphia, one of the few quote-unquote needs they might have is adding more talent at edge rusher, with Josh Sweat probably getting a pretty decent-sized bag in free agency. So getting a guy like Nick Skorton there to go along with Nolan Smith in that defensive line, I think just is another great pick by Howie Roseman. It makes sense why he's the best GM in the sports if he gets this pick.
Silas in the chat, wanting a corner for the Buffalo Bills. I think these are the two biggest needs. I think corner, and then of course defensive tackle as well. We saw that how tough it was for them to have to play Kyer Elam in the playoffs, and how he is just not a starting caliber corner at the NFL level. So he mentioned Trey Amos as a pick there. I think that Amos could certainly be on the board. I'm a big Trey Amos fan. He's a little bit scheme dependent. He's more of that press man coverage corner type of a feel. So if that's what they really want to run next year, I think that you could certainly talk about that. But I think defensive line too. Kenneth Grant was the pick here really just because of the value. I think that Grant just brings so much to the table. He's so uniquely gifted in how fast his hands and his feet are, despite being 340 pounds. And then I'm with you on Skorton, man. He's somebody who, when I went through my edge rush rankings for NFLSC, when Connor and I were doing those, I had Skorton at 7. It felt too low, like his edge 7, even in a really good edge rusher class, because Skorton was my edge 1 going into the season. And I think I might have been a little bit harsher on him in the year that he had, just because I had such high expectations, and I think he's a great football player. But the more I look at it, man, just not really a productive year for Texas A&M's defensive line at all. I mean, Shamar Stewart didn't really take that next step. Only had a sack and a half this past year. Only had a sack and a half the year before, so he didn't really take that next step in that area. Shamar Turner, they kicked more inside at defensive tackle, which I think is right for him, but much less productive player. And then when you look at Nick Skorton, also much less productive than what he was when he was at Purdue. So I'm wondering if this was this just kind of a Texas A&M defense thing? Like, did they not really put their defensive linemen in positions to really make a lot of backfield production? Because I think these are 3 really talented football players who you could say all 3 of them underperformed relative to their talent level and expectations. So I think that there's a very real possibility that Skorton goes a lot higher than this, but just ended up having him fall to the Philadelphia Eagles. And this is a team that's probably going to lose Josh Sweat, probably going to lose Milt Williams in free agency. They're going to lose Brandon Graham to retirement. So, another SEC guy for Howie Roseman here to put on that defensive line. Never a bad thing. I think it's a big reason why they ended up winning the Super Bowl this year. There we go. All right, 32 picks up and down. Appreciate these guys obviously being good sports and not getting on me too hard for some
worst mock ever.
Having some good conversations there. Appreciate everybody in the chat getting involved in this as well. The Mock Draft Madness is going to continue. We're going to have another mock draft review episode for you a little bit later this week, but I'm not going to tell you exactly whose it is. I'm going to wait till you guys, you got to smash that notification on the YouTube channel to make sure that you see exactly when that pops up, and you'll be able to see whose mock draft we're going to review next. For Max Chadwick and Dalton Wasserman, I'm Trevor Sikkema saying thank you guys so much for watching and listening to the PFF NFL show. We'll see you guys next time.